The Passover Seder, still of course fresh in our minds, is a real feast for the senses. The sight of the beautifully laid out table and the Seder plate, replete with the symbols of the festival, the smells emanating from the kitchen and the table, the taste and the touch of the bitter herbs that bring tears to our eyes, and the sweet haroset that makes us smile, and the sound of the voices around the table, reading, singing, and talking together. I must have attended more than 60 Sedarim in my life, and that's a lot of hard-boiled eggs. And there's still something new that strikes me each year, or indeed something that strikes me anew. And this year, it was the journey that we make through the Haggadah, the journey that takes us from slavery to freedom on so many different levels. This year we are here, next year in the land of Israel. This year we are slaves, next year we will be free. Well, it was my friend and colleague, Rabbi Kathleen Middleton, who at our communal Seder at Mosaic last night set off these thoughts in me when she talked about the transformation of the Matzah through the Seder. So it starts as lechem oni, halachma anya, the bread of affliction, of misery, of poverty, and it ends as the bread of freedom. So what is Matzah? Probably the most iconic symbol of Passover, so much so that one of the biblical names of the festival is Chag HaMatzot, the festival of unleavened bread. Matzah is the simplest of foods, made from flour and water, prepared from start to finish within 18 minutes. Matzah is described as lechem oni in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 3. In Aramaic, halachma anya. These words begin the invitation early on in our Seder for all who are hungry to come and eat of it. Well, that in itself is a whole sermon, why we would invite people to come and share the bread of affliction, but not for now. And later on, just before we taste the matzah, the Haggadah quotes a different biblical passage to explain the meaning of the matzah on our table. Why do we eat this unleavened bread? Because our ancestors did not have time to let their dough ferment before the true ruler, the Holy One ever to be blessed, was revealed to them and redeemed them. As it is said in Exodus chapter 12, they baked the dough they had brought out of Egypt into cakes of unleavened bread, for they were driven out of Egypt so that they could not delay to prepare food for themselves. As American journalist Jeff Jacoby explains, all at once, matzah has ceased to be the bread of affliction and has become the bread of freedom. Not the bare bones food that sustained the Israelites during the years of hard labor, but the bare bones food they prepared as they stood on the cusp of liberty. All their lives they had eaten matzah under the severe constraints of servitude, denied even the time to bake a proper loaf of bread. Now, as they rushed to leave Egypt and all its cruelties behind, they were again in too much of a hurry to bake a proper loaf of bread. Once again, they prepared the hard, dry flatbread they knew so well. But this time, it epitomized not the wretchedness of being downtrodden, but the eager anticipation of people whose lives were suddenly filled with promise and possibility. Freedom is in the psyche, not in the bread, writes Rabbi Yitz Greenberg in his book, The Jewish Way. The nature of the matzah itself doesn't change, but that hard, flat bread the Israelites ate while slaves in Egypt, the bread of slavery that was so hard to swallow, while still remaining the hard, flat bread, became the taste of freedom, the bread of freedom, as it baked on their backs while Moses and Aaron led them out of Egypt. Well, about that moment when we hold up the matzah and declare, "This is the bread of affliction our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt," Rabbi Jackie Nino from Sydney's Emmanuel Synagogue comments, "This is the central statement of the Seder and Pesach, a time when we reach beyond ourselves, acknowledge that there are those in the world in need because of hunger, and others who have a different need, perhaps loneliness, fear, pain, struggle. Not all need is physical hunger, and we invite everyone to celebrate this moment together. Pesach is a time for us to open our doors and see the struggle in the world and reach out to soothe the wounds of others. The Matzah represents that call, reminds us of the struggle of our ancestors and the pain which still exists in our world. But then as the Seder progresses, the Matzah changes along with us, and we recite at the end of the Seder, "This is the bread of affliction. This is the bread of freedom that our ancestors ate." The Matzah, like us, is changed through the process of the Seder. The bread of affliction has become the bread of freedom. Nothing has changed about the Matzah, but bread eaten in slavery and bread eaten in freedom are different. There is a transformation in us which changes the very nature of the Matzah. In the same way, we are called upon to change the world and transform it to become all that we dream it can be. Well, just briefly, there's another instance in our Seder when we see a similar kind of shift and transformation. The Mishnah prescribes that the narrative of the Haggadah should matchil bignut u'mesayem b'shevach, should begin with degradation and end with glory. And the Gemara asks, what is that degradation at the beginning of the story? And two great Babylonian rabbis offer different answers. Rav says that one should begin by saying, at first, our ancestors were idol worshippers, before concluding with words of glory. The other Rabbi, Shmuel, says that the disgrace with which one should begin is with these words, Avadim hayinu, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. So while for Shmuel, the degradation lay in the physical slavery of the Israelites, and the Shevach, the glory, lay in the physical exodus, the liberation from slavery, for Rav, the degradation was the spiritual darkness of idolatry, and the glory was the enlightenment to be found in the worship of the one God. And again, like the Matzah, that word, avodah, is used to describe two quite opposite states. So avodah was the word for the hard labor, avodah kasha, the Israelites were subjected to under the Egyptians. And avodah zarah, strange service or strange worship, is the Hebrew term for idol worship. But avodah is also the word we use for the service, for the worship of the Eternal One, avodat halev, service of the heart. I love that that same word can be used in so many different ways, and that the Haggadah honors both perspectives, the physical and the spiritual, including both passages in the Haggadah. And while we end our Seder in glory, there is a particular way we invite it into our homes and our lives. We invoke Elijah, the messenger whose arrival, our tradition tells us, will bring about the messianic age of universal peace and harmony, when all people are free and able to experience joy, happiness, and blessing. As we know from what is happening in our world, we are very far from that state. Too many people are still slaves. Too many people are still in Egypt. Californian Rabbi Harold Schulweis suggests that we fill Elijah's cup at the Seder by passing it around the table for everyone to pour some wine into it from his or her own glass. In this way, we acknowledge symbolically our role in making the journey from slavery to freedom happen for our world, in making real the hope we express at the end of our Seder, next year in Jerusalem, or as we explain that in our liberal Haggadah, next year in a world redeemed. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will. Amen.